Welcome everyone to our March demo day. Alex is going to get us started here with some demos of new SO quote functionality within point of sale. So I'll hand it over to him.
Alrighty. Yep. So going to be showing kind of it's still a bit of a work in progress, but nearing completion. Our work on entering SO quotes through point of sale. And so just to kind of specify that right now this is not, supporting quote.e entry of quotes. It's specifically SO quote.e quotes. And so this will be available to any users that have access to SO quote.e in Rover. So when selecting a customer to start, you'll now get this prompt that asks you if you want to enter a quote or an order. And again, this is only going to display if you have access to enter both. If you only have access to SO.e and not SO quote.e, you will not get this, and you will go straight to entering an order just as before. And so once we select quote, you'll see that the interface looks pretty similar to orders. There's just some different fields here, some different naming here. We've got notes and confidential notes, which don't show up in orders, but do in quotes. So we can enter a couple notes here. We do have an option to select the costing method as well. And then so we can go on to selecting parts that we want to put on the quote. And so I can add one item here, and so it goes out to the back end. This is kind of the in-process validation process that I think some integrations use for order entry. This is required for SO quote entry, even in Rover backends. And so that's why you get that little bit of a loading screen. We're just making sure that everything looks okay according to the Rover system as you progress through. And so see, I added one part here. I've got a price of 55, but if I add 20 more, now I've got a unit price of 50, and so we can kind of go like, okay, why did that change? We can go into the cart. We can expand this down, and we'll actually see the same pricing table that you get in SOQuote.e that says, okay, so anything more than 20, less than equal to 50, we're actually going to have a price of 50 per item, and so that updated on the fly there. Otherwise, functionality is largely the same as your order entry here, and so then we can go ahead and create the quote. You can also save it as a draft if you'd like, just as you would with orders. So we'll create the quote. So just real quick, 1455, just to kind of demonstrate. So in SOQuote.e, now we have SO quote 1455 here. So with that customer that we selected, the date, we've got our notes and confidential notes here, and we've got our line items. And so you've got that same pricing table shown before, and we've got a scheduled date. This is going to be equal to the order date that you entered on the order header screen, and the scheduled quantity for that line item, which we had entered 21. And so we can go down and we've got the other line item there too. All right, and then from there, if you have entered a quote, we can go over to this quotes tab. Now we've got a quotes table here. Basically the same functionality that you'd get on the orders table. You can print and export, you can filter, sort, you can load all the quotes. And so, if you want to kind of just refresh, reload things, you can also clear all the filters here. And so this quote table is driven exclusively by lookup as well. So that will need to be configured. And actually, I did not look that up beforehand, but that should be available here in MRK control. So you've got sales quotes lookup, customer quotes lookup. So this is where you would define which lookup to use to drive these tables. From here too, if you want, you can download a quote. And you can also, my pop-up got blocked. Okay, well, we can take a look at that in a second. But so here you can also click into quote here, and so we can go back into editing the quote that we've already entered here. And you'll see that we've got access to everything here, and here we are back in the point of sale flow, but for that SO quote. So largely a very, very similar experience to order entry, but just driving SO quotes instead.
All right, thanks, Alex. If that was all, then I will jump into some related parts demo.
Sure, yep.
All righty, share my screen. Okay, so we're adding the ability to define relationships between parts, and the maintenance for that is all done through the inventory module. So if I search for a part that item will, and then open that item. There's a new section now called related parts. And there's quite a bit to this. So first, we're calling the lists of related parts option groups. The option groups themselves are currently managed in a control record, which it looks like I closed out of. Give me one moment here. So that's option groups.control. Eventually, we'll pull this management into the web as well. But the idea here is that this is defining groups of, it's actually defining the names of groups of related items. So in this case, I have an option group called related parts. I have another one called also purchased, and then a number of other items. So these names are meant to be shared across parts. So this is just defining the name of a type of relationship that you're wanting to then add parts into. So then for a given part, you can define one or more of these related groups, and they can also be nested. So part GLB has defined related parts, and these are the parts that are defined under that related parts group. Then there's a few other toggles here. So each part that is defined as related can be marked as required. So then in certain flows, those parts would automatically be added to a sales quote or order if you add the parent part. So that's determined by these checkboxes up here. So track relationship means that as I'm adding the related parts to a sales quote or order, the detail about the relationship to the parent is going to be included on that sales quote or order. And that allows us to then show some of that hierarchy within the cart, which I will demonstrate here in a moment. So that's what the track relationship does. Selection required in combination with track relationship means that if you add the parent part to a cart and then have not made a selection from the list of parts that are in that option group, then when you attempt to save the quote or order, it will force you to make a selection. So the idea here is like, you know, you have a parent part and then you have an option group that's maybe required accessories. And maybe there's 5 parts defined there. It's implying that you have to make at least one selection below there. We do also intend to add a quantity here that would allow you to define a default quantity. So if an item were required, it could have a default quantity of 5, and when it's automatically added, then that quantity will go in there. So yeah, you can add additional groups, and then you can add parts within the group. So we are in related parts right here. We can bring up a search here. And this is tied to a lookup as well. So there's a lookup defined in inv.control. Looks like for some reason I didn't get any wheels. Let's see. So you get the list of items there, and then you can just make a selection. And that will then add it to the option group as a related part. To add nested option groups, when you're in an option group, you choose add child group, and then you can select that from the list. So that's how you manage the nested groups, and those nested groups then show up in this breadcrumbs view, so it's clear that you're in the option group 6 below option group 7. So that covers the management of the related parts. So now I'm going to jump into quote creation, and I'll show how the UI of that looks when you're going through to create a quote. So again, I've just selected a customer here. I'm going to move on to part selection, and I'm going to search for one of my parts that has related parts defined. So if I then click on the part detail for that item, each of the option groups that are defined will then show up in their sections, as well as the related parts below. This is still a work in progress, but this is an indication of this option group has that track relationship defined, and it's saying you can't add this part until you've added the parent part. We're going back and forth on this. We may make some adjustments there, but that's the idea of why that's disabled at the moment. So I'm going to now add the parent part. So I'm adding GLB to the cart. And now through that validation on the host side that Alex was mentioning, it's now giving me back notifications indicating that there are required selections or that required items have been added to the cart. Again, this is a bit of a work in progress. We may decide to not make this modals that need to be dismissed. There may just be some other means of viewing that these notifications came back. But this is saying that part GLP-B requires a selection be made for these following option groups. If I dismiss that, then here's the other notification that said a GLB had these required accessories. We've automatically added those to the cart. So if I click close then and I dismiss the part detail, you can see that the parent GLB item was added, and then those required parts were automatically added below. So in the related parts option group, these 4 items were added to the cart. So again, like Alex mentioned, SO quote is a little closer to being in production. This is still a bit out, but this is kind of a preview of what we have in the works here. Any questions on related parts or how they show up in part detail and adding them to a quote? Okay, well then I'm going to show a couple other quick previews. Again, these are not in production, but will be going out shortly. So we've added the ability for multiple dashboards to be defined. The management of that, again, is done on the desktop app. So in Web Control, there's a new Pages tab. This allows you to define multiple dashboards and then for them to be secured individually per user. So first of all, there are multiple dashboards defined here, and they have a parent page. So the parent page must be dashboard in order for it to show up in this tab view here. And then in security.e, a user needs to be granted access to the individual dashboards for them to display here. So it allows a pretty granular control over what dashboards show up for each user. But then if I just tab between the defined dashboards here, you can see that you can now have multiple dashboards showing up. Also on Web Control, you're able to define links. So if an item is listed as a link rather than embedded, and the user has permission to that link, then another icon will show up in the menu here, and clicking that icon will then open that defined link. I think we may add some additional functionality to let this either have a nested menu so that you could have multiple links defined. At the moment, it would end up showing additional folders here for each link that's defined. But yeah, I think we'll make some adjustments there. But just gives quite a bit of granular control over multiple dashboards and or including links to external resources that are not Rover Web items. Any questions on that? All right, then I think finally, let me check my notes here. Yeah, so the final item I wanted to show is just some improvements that we've made to production scheduling. I believe we may have demoed in a previous meeting that we were adding the notion of sub-statuses. So we had a request for additional statuses that are outside of our normal work order statuses to be defined. So all the items that you're seeing here, with the exception of picker printed, are default work order statuses. In this particular integration, we've added what we're referring to as a sub-status that exists between released and pulled, and it's called picker printed. So we expose that in wo.control. So in the scheduling tab, you can now define substatuses. So under released, I have this substatus picker printed that is defined here. And you can define multiple substatuses per parent status. And any of them that are defined here will then show up on the web as options in your status filters on work order type data tables. So that would exist both in unscheduled orders below production scheduling and in the work orders tab. Additionally, you can define a color code for those substatuses. So in production scheduling on the Gantt chart, we have a key, and items that are added onto the chart and saved are then color coded with this key, which is related to the status of the work order. So the substatuses can now have their own color coding, which shows up here as well. We'll drag an item on here. and save it. Yeah, so this work order had a status of release. That's why it's orange. So again, that is added functionality that shows up in both the work order tab. So you can now filter by the substatus values, and also in the scheduling tab. One other addition that we made based on some feedback of usability is when the work order table of unscheduled orders is rather long, if you're displaying 50 or more per page, there was an issue where you're trying to click and drag an item that is causing the chart itself to be off the page. So what we've added there is on the drag event. So when you click and start to drag, we now move the page up to the chart. So that makes it a lot easier to drop that item on the chart if the chart was not visible based on where you were in the flow. So that's just kind of a quality of life change there. Okay, I believe that is all I have to show. Any questions? All right. Well, if there's no questions, then thank you, everyone.